The courtroom was dead silent when my 10-year-old son Colby stood up from his chair. Every eye in that room turned to watch this small boy with sandy brown hair and his father's green eyes, but none of his cruelty. His Spider-Man sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he took a step forward, and I saw the judge's expression shift from annoyance to concern. "Your Honor." Cole's voice was small but clear, cutting through the suffocating tension like a blade through silk. "Should I show you who really made these cuts on me?" My heart stopped. This wasn't part of the plan. We discussed him possibly testifying, but not like this. Not with such raw determination burning in his young eyes. Beside me, my 6-year-old daughter, Mira, gripped my hand so tight I could feel her little nails digging into my palm. She knew something the rest of the courtroom was about to learn. Colby began rolling up his sleeves with the kind of careful precision that made my stomach twist. Each fold revealed more of his thin arms, and I watched my ex-husband Garrett's face transform from that insufferable, smug expression he'd worn all morning to something I'd never seen before. Pure, naked fear. His expensive lawyer, Mr. Vaughn, who just seconds ago had been destroying my character with surgical precision, stood frozen with his mouth slightly open, his next rehearsed attack dying on his lips. The judge leaned forward in his chair, the leather creaking in the silence. Judge Haraman had overseen hundreds of custody cases, but something in Cole's voice, maybe the weight of truth that only children can carry, made him abandon his usual stern detachment. "Young man, what are you trying to show me?" Colby looked directly at his father, then at Garrett's new wife, Wendy, who suddenly seemed very interested in studying her manicured nails. Then my brave, beautiful son turned back to the judge and spoke 7 words that changed everything. "The truth about who hurt me, sir. My mother, Helen, who'd been sitting behind Garrett all morning in a show of support that felt like betrayal, gasped audibly. She'd spent weeks telling everyone who would listen that I was unstable, that my struggles with depression made me dangerous, that the children would be better off with their successful father and his new wife in their big suburban house. Now she was about to learn what her grandson had been hiding to protect me." The courtroom security officer took a step closer, sensing the shift in energy. My court-appointed lawyer, Miss Reeves, who'd been fighting an uphill battle against Garrett's legal team, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I could feel her trembling too. We both knew that whatever happened next would determine not just who got custody, but whether my children would finally be free from the nightmare they'd been living. Cole's small hands finished rolling up his second sleeve. The fluorescent courthouse lights seemed to grow brighter, harsher, illuminating. Everything we'd tried to keep hidden. Time slowed to a crawl as everyone waited for what my 8-year-old son was about to reveal. The truth that had been suffocating our family for months was about to breathe its first breath of air. And nothing would ever be the same again. 6 months before that courtroom moment, I was living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Denver, trying to rebuild our lives after finally escaping my marriage to Garrett. The apartment wasn't much to look at with its beige walls and carpet that had seen better days, but it was ours. It was safe. And for the first time in years, I could breathe without wondering what mood Garrett would be in when he walked through the door. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up at 5:30 before the kids and spend a few precious minutes drinking coffee in silence while checking my phone for new messages from him. There were always messages. "You'll never win this," one would say. "I have the money, the connections, and everyone knows you're unstable." Another might read, "The kids deserve better than a crazy mother." Each text was carefully crafted to stay just within legal boundaries while slowly chipping away at my resolve. I'd delete them after taking screenshots for my lawyer, then go wake Colby and Mira for school. Colby would stumble out of the room he shared with his sister, his hair sticking up in every direction, already asking what was for breakfast. Mira would follow quietly, dragging her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, behind her, its worn ears testament to how tightly she held it through the night. "Mom makes the best scrambled eggs in the whole world," Colby would announce to no one in particular, settling at our small kitchen table. It was these moments, these simple morning routines, that Garrett was trying to steal from us. The truth was, I had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression after years of his abuse. The diagnosis came as a relief, actually. It meant I wasn't going crazy like Garrett had always told me. It meant there was a reason I'd felt like I was drowning for so long. And more importantly, it meant there was treatment. Yes, I took medication every morning with my coffee. Yes, I saw Dr. Martinez, my therapist, twice a week while the kids were at school. But I was healing, getting stronger every day, learning to recognize the difference between Garrett's voice in my head and my own. Garrett had twisted my mental health journey into a weapon. He told his family, our mutual friends, and anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable and a danger to the children. He'd somehow gotten photos of my medication bottles during a pickup exchange and shared them like evidence of a crime. The antidepressants that were helping me be a better mother became, in his narrative, proof that I was unfit to be one at all. My own mother, Helen, didn't help. She'd visit every Sunday, bringing her judgment wrapped in concern. "Diana, maybe the kids would be better off with their father," she'd say while watching me make lunch. "At least temporarily, until you get yourself sorted out." She'd glance at the prescribed antidepressants on my counter like they were illegal drugs. Then look at my small apartment with barely concealed disgust. "Garrett has that big house in Highlands Ranch," she'd continue as if I hadn't been the one who'd helped him buy it with my income before I quit my job at his insistence. His new wife, Wendy, seems so put together, and she doesn't work so she could be there for the children full-time. Colby would always defend me, his 8-year-old sense of justice stronger than most adults I knew. "Mom's the best," he'd tell his grandmother firmly, his green eyes flashing with anger. "She reads to us every night, helps with homework, and makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches. Dad just puts us in front of the TV when we visit. Plus, Mom lets us build blanket forts on Fridays," Mira would add quietly, finally finding her voice. She'd been talking less and less since the separation, but she always spoke up when someone criticized me. Those Friday night blanket forts had become our tradition. We'd push all the living room furniture together, drape every sheet and blanket we owned over it, and crawl inside with popcorn and my laptop to watch movies. Last Friday, squeezed together in our makeshift castle, Colby had said, "Mom, I don't care if Dad's house has a pool and a game room. This is better because you're here." Mira had nodded, clutching Mr. Hoppy tighter. "Dad's house is too quiet," she'd whispered, "and Wendy doesn't like it when I bring Mr. Poppy." These were the moments that mattered, the ones that made me certain I was fighting for the right thing. My children didn't need a bigger house or fancier things. They needed a parent who saw them, who heard them, who made them feel safe enough to be themselves. They needed their mother, medication and all, small apartment and all, healing journey and all. The custody battle officially began when Garrett filed for full custody 3 months after our separation, claiming I was an unfit mother. The papers arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while the kids were at school. I remember standing in my doorway, staring at the court documents while the process server walked away. Emergency motion for full custody was stamped across the top and underneath in cold legal language. Garrett had painted me as a monster. His lawyer, Mr. Vaughn, was known throughout Denver for destroying people on the stand. He'd won custody for fathers who barely knew their children's middle names, and now Garrett had hired him to take mine away. My court-appointed attorney, Miss Reeves, was decent, but overworked, juggling 20 cases to Vaughn's selective 3 or 4. "Just stay calm and tell the truth," she advised during our first meeting. But we both knew Garrett had been building his case for months while I'd been focused on simply surviving each day. 2 weeks before the hearing, strange things started happening during the children's weekend visits with their father. Colby came home from his first overnight with bruises on both arms, dark purple marks that wrapped around his skinny forearms like bracelets. When I asked what happened, he looked at the floor and mumbled, "Dad said I fell off my bike." "But you don't have a bike at Dad's house," I said gently. Cole's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not supposed to tell you things about Dad's house anymore. He said it would make you sad, and you're already too sad." When I tried to document the bruises with photos, Garrett filed an immediate complaint with the court, claiming I was alienating the children and coaching them against their father. Miss Reeves warned me to be careful. "Every move you make right now will be scrutinized. Don't give them ammunition." But how could I not protect my children? Mira had started having nightmares after visits, waking up screaming for me. When I'd ask her what scared her, she'd just shake her head and hold Mr. Hoppy tighter. "Wendy doesn't like me," was all she would say. Then came the accusation that nearly broke me. 3 weeks before the hearing, Garrett submitted a declaration claiming I was self-harming in front of the children. It was a complete fabrication built on a grain of truth. Yes, I had scars on my wrists, but they were old, faded reminders from my darkest days years ago, long before the children were born. During a particularly bad period in college, before I even met Garrett, I'd made choices I wasn't proud of. I'd gotten help, gone through therapy, and never relapsed. But somehow, Garrett had photos taken during a recent exchange when I'd worn short sleeves on an unusually warm October day. He'd zoomed in, edited them to enhance the contrast, making decade-old scars look fresh and angry. His declaration claimed the children had told him they watched me hurt myself nightly, that they were traumatized and scared. "Mom, why is Dad lying about you?" Mira asked one evening after overhearing me crying on the phone with Miss Reeves. Her voice was so small, so confused. Colby wrapped his arm around his sister, suddenly seeming older than his 8 years, because he wants to take us away from Mom, he said matter-of-factly. "But I won't let him. I'll tell the judge the truth." The truth doesn't always win in court, I wanted to tell them, but didn't. How could I explain to my children that their father was using my biggest vulnerabilities against me? That seeking help for mental health was being twisted into evidence of unfitness? My mother's reaction was even more devastating. Garrett had shown her the edited photos during one of his calculated visits to her house. By the time she called me, she was hysterical. "Deanna, how could you do this in front of the children? I thought you were getting better, but clearly you're sicker than I thought." No amount of explaining could convince her the photos were old. Garrett seemed so concerned about the children. She said, "Maybe he's right. Maybe they need stability right now, and you're just not capable of providing it." The betrayal cut deeper than anything Garrett could do to me directly. My own mother had chosen to believe his lies over my truth. She announced she would be attending the hearing to support what's best for the children, which apparently meant supporting Garrett. A week before the hearing, Miss Reeves delivered more bad news. Garrett's team has 3 character witnesses, including your mother. They have a child psychologist ready to testify about the damage mentally ill parents can cause. They have your therapy records, which they'll twist to make you look unstable. Deanna, I need you to understand how hard this is going to be. I understood perfectly. Garrett had money, connections, and a narrative that played into every stereotype about mothers with mental health struggles. All I had was the truth. And in family court, sometimes that wasn't enough. 3 days before the hearing, everything changed. It was Sunday evening, and I was folding laundry while Mira colored at the kitchen table. Colby approached me with an expression I'd never seen on his young face before, a mixture of determination and fear that made my hands freeze mid-fold. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said, glancing at his sister. "Alone, please." I sat down the shirt I was holding and followed him to my bedroom. He sat on the edge of my bed, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. For a moment, he just stared at those hands, gathering courage for whatever he needed to say. "Mom, I have to show you something, but you have to promise not to get too upset," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Honey, you can tell me anything," I said, sitting beside him, though my heart was already racing. Slowly, carefully, Colby rolled up his sleeves. What I saw made my blood turn cold. There were cuts on both his arms, deliberate ones, some still fresh enough to be pink, others just beginning to scab over. They weren't deep, but they were intentional, methodical, even placed where they'd be hidden by long sleeves. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a sob. My baby, my 8-year-old son, had marks on his arms that looked horrifyingly familiar to anyone who'd ever seen self-harm. But before I could speak, before I could even process what I was seeing, Colby grabbed my hands. "Mom, listen," he said urgently. "I didn't do this to myself. Dad's wife, Wendy, she did this." The room seemed to spin. "What do you mean she did this?" Cole's words came out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. "Last weekend, Dad and Wendy sat me down in their bathroom. Wendy had Dad's razor. She said it would only hurt for a second, that it was for our family. Dad held my arm still and told me to be brave, that sometimes we have to do hard things to get what we want. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and dangerous. They cut you. Dad said if I showed these to the judge and said you did it, we'd get to live in the big house all the time. He said we'd have our own rooms, a pool, everything we wanted. He said you were sick anyway and needed time to get better without worrying about us." Cole's tears were flowing freely now. "But Mom, I don't want to lie and I don't want to live with them. Wendy scares me, and Dad, he's different when you're not around. He's mean. He calls you names and tells us you're crazy. I held my son while he cried, my own tears falling into his sandy hair. The evil of what Garrett had done, using our own child as a weapon, marking his body to destroy me, was beyond anything I'd imagined even he was capable of. "Mom, I want to tell the truth," Colby said, pulling back to look at me. "I want to tell the judge everything." The next morning, I called Miss Reeves and told her everything. She was silent for a long moment after I finished. "This changes everything, Deanna, but it's also incredibly risky. Putting Colby on the stand means subjecting him to cross-examination. Vaughn will try to confuse him, make him look coached or unreliable. He's only 8. "I know," I said, watching Colby eat breakfast with unusual solemnity, "but he wants to do this." Monsieur Reeves came over that afternoon to meet with Colby. She spoke to him gently, asking him to tell his story multiple times, testing for consistency. Colby never wavered. If anything, more details emerged. How Wendy had said this was their secret. How Dad had promised him a new gaming system if he did good in court. How they'd practiced what he should say to the judge. "I even have proof," Colby said suddenly, running to his backpack. He pulled out his little tablet, the one Garrett had given him for his birthday. I recorded them talking about it after. They didn't know. On the grainy video, we could hear Garrett's voice saying, "Remember, buddy, you tell them your mom did this when she was having one of her episodes. We practiced this." Wendy's voice added, "It's for the best, sweetie. Your mom needs help." Miss Reeves immediately made copies of everything. "This is powerful evidence, but I need you both to understand that Garrett's team will come at this hard. They'll claim you coached him, that you made these marks yourself, that the video is taken out of context." "Let them try," Colby said with surprising fierceness. "I know what happened. Mira knows too. She saw Wendy take the razor from the medicine cabinet. That night, we prepared as a family, not coaching, just making sure Colby felt supported and safe. Mira drew pictures that would later become evidence, her artistic 6-year-old mind processing trauma through crayon and paper. One showed Wendy as a dark figure with something sharp in her hand. Another showed our small apartment filled with hearts and suns, while Dad's big house was colored in blacks and grays. The hearing began at 9 p.m. sharp in Courtroom 4B of the Denver Family Court. The room smelled like old wood and floor polish, and the morning sun slanted through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat at the defendant's table with Miss Reeves, trying to keep my hands steady as Mr. Vaughn launched into his opening statement. "Your Honor, we're here today because these children are in danger." Vaughn began, his voice commanding the room. "Their mother, Deanna, is mentally unstable, taking multiple psychiatric medications, and has a documented history of self-harm. Most disturbing of all, she continues this destructive behavior in front of her young children." He produced the edited photos of my old scars, displaying them on a screen for everyone to see. My mother, sitting in the row behind Garrett, shook her head sadly. I heard her whisper to Garrett's sister, "Some people are just born broken." I tried to help her, but you can't fix what doesn't want to be fixed. Each word from my mother's mouth felt like a physical blow, but I kept my eyes forward, focused on Judge Haraman's face as he examined the photographs with obvious concern. Van continued his assault for 20 minutes, painting me as a woman spiraling out of control. "These innocent children watch their mother cut herself nightly," he said, gesturing dramatically. "They live in fear, never knowing which version of their mother they'll encounter. Will it be the medicated zombie, the crying mess, or the woman so desperate for attention she marks her own body?" "Objection," Miss Reeves said, but Judge Haraman waved her off. "I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Vaughn." Garrett took the stand next, playing the part of concerned father perfectly. He spoke about finding me in states of distress, about the children calling him crying, about his fears for their safety. Wendy sat behind him, nodding supportively, her face a mask of concern. When it was our turn, Miss Reeves called me to testify. I explained the truth about my scars, my treatment, my dedication to my children, but I could see skepticism in Judge Haraman's eyes. The narrative Garrett had crafted was too compelling, too neatly packaged. Then, without warning, without being called, Colby stood up from his seat in the gallery where he'd been sitting with the court-appointed child advocate. "Your Honor," his young voice rang out clear and strong. "Should I show you who really made these cuts on me?" The entire courtroom froze. Judge Haraman leaned forward. "Young man, you haven't been called to testify." "I know, sir, but I have something important to show you. Please." The judge glanced at both lawyers. then nodded slowly. "Approach the bench, son." Colby walked forward with remarkable composure for an 8-year-old, his Spider-Man sneakers squeaking against the floor. He stopped directly in front of the judge and began rolling up his sleeves with deliberate care. The courtroom gasped collectively as the cuts became visible, still pink and healing, clearly recent. But then Colby did something no one expected. He turned and pointed directly at Wendy in the gallery. "She did it, Your Honor, 3 days ago. My dad watched and told me exactly what to say today." "That's a lie," Garrett shouted, jumping to his feet. "He's been coached. This is exactly the kind of manipulation we've been warning about." But Colby continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Dad held my arms while Wendy used his razor. They said, "If I showed these to you and blamed Mom, we'd get to live in the big house. Dad promised me a PlayStation 5 in my own room if I lied good enough." "This is outrageous," Vaughn objected. "This child has clearly been manipulated." Colby reached into his pocket and pulled out his tablet. "I have proof," he said, holding it up. "I recorded them talking about it after." Dad didn't know the tablet was recording. Judge Haraman immediately called for order. "Everyone sit down. Belief, please take that tablet as evidence." "Young man, are you saying your father and stepmother intentionally harmed you?" "Yes, sir. And they told me to lie about Mom. But Mom always says the truth matters more than being scared. And I'm tired of being scared." Mira suddenly stood up too, clutching Mr. Hoppy. "I saw Wendy take the razor," she called out, her tiny voice shaking but determined. "I was hiding behind the door. She said it was their secret game." The courtroom erupted. Wendy's face had gone chalk white and she was shaking her head frantically. Garrett was demanding to speak, but Judge Haraman banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order. We're taking an immediate recess. Court officers will take custody of both children for forensic interviews. No parents are to have contact until further notice. Mr. Vaughn, I suggest you advise your client to remain available. This court will reconvene in 2 hours." As the bailiff led my children away, Colby looked back at me and mouthed, "It's okay, Mom." My brave, beautiful boy had just changed everything with his courage to tell the truth. The 2-hour recess stretched into 4 as forensic interviewers spoke with both children separately. I waited, in a small conference room with Miss Reeves, drinking terrible courthouse coffee and trying not to fall apart. She kept reassuring me that Cole's evidence was compelling, but we both knew how these things could go. Children's testimony was often dismissed, especially when wealthy fathers with expensive lawyers were involved. When court reconvened at 2:00 p.m., the atmosphere had completely shifted. Judge Haraman entered with a grave expression, and I noticed 2 police officers had joined the court security. Garrett sat rigid at his table, his face pale and drawn. Wendy was nowhere to be seen. "I've reviewed the forensic interviews with both children," Judge Haraman began, his voice heavy with barely contained anger. "I've also reviewed the video evidence provided by the minor child, Colby. What I've discovered is deeply disturbing." He turned to look directly at Garrett. "Mr. Peterson, the evidence suggests you and your wife deliberately harmed your son to frame his mother for abuse. This is not only unconscionable but criminal. I'm issuing an immediate emergency order granting full custody to the mother, Deanna Peterson." The relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. Miss Reeves squeezed my hand as the judge continued. "Furthermore, Mr. Peterson, you will have supervised visitation only, pending a full criminal investigation. The court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for charges of child abuse, conspiracy, and filing false reports." "This is a mistake," Garrett shouted, but his lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. The judge wasn't finished. Mrs. Wendy Peterson left the courthouse during recess, but was apprehended by police in the parking lot. She has already given a full confession, admitting that you, Mr. Peterson, orchestrated this entire scheme. She's agreed to testify in exchange for a plea deal. My mother, who had been sitting frozen throughout the proceedings, suddenly broke down, sobbing. She stood up shakily and made her way toward me. "Deanna, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I believed him over my own daughter. I failed you, and I failed my grandchildren." "Not now, Mom," I said quietly, my focus entirely on the door where my children would soon appear. When Colby and Mira were finally brought back, they ran straight into my arms. We held each other in the middle of that courtroom, not caring who was watching. Colby whispered, "I told you the truth would win, Mom. That was 1 year ago. The criminal trial is ongoing, but Garrett is facing serious prison time. He hasn't seen the children since that day in court. His supervised visitation rights revoked after he failed to show accountability for his actions. Wendy took a plea deal for probation and mandatory counseling in exchange for her testimony against him. The real healing took time. KPI's physical wounds healed within weeks, but the emotional scars required months of therapy. He still sees Dr. Patterson every week, working through the trauma of what his father did to him. Some nights, he still has nightmares about that bathroom, about being held down, about the razor, but he's also developed incredible resilience. Last month, he spoke at a children's advocacy event about the importance of believing kids when they report abuse. Mira found her voice again through play therapy. She no longer whispers or hides behind Mr. Hoppy. Just yesterday, she raised her hand in class to answer a math problem, something her teacher says she never did before. She draws happy pictures now, full of rainbows and flowers, and our little family of 3. My relationship with my mother is complicated, but improving. She's in therapy herself now, working through what she calls her toxic need to see the best in men and the worst in women. She babysits once a week, and slowly, very slowly, we're building something new. She tells Colby all the time how proud she is of his bravery, how he's her hero. He usually just shrugs and says, "I just told the truth, Grandma." Last week, Colby won a citizenship award at school for exceptional bravery and integrity. Standing at that little podium in the gymnasium, he said, "My mom taught me that telling the truth isn't always easy, but it's always right. Sometimes being brave means standing up even when your voice shakes, and sometimes the smallest voices can say the biggest truths. But here's what Colby taught me. Our children see everything. They absorb our strength and our struggles. They know the difference between truth and lies, even when adults try to confuse them. And when given the chance, when given just a moment of courage, they'll choose truth over comfort every single time." My 8-year-old son saved our family by refusing to let lies win. He showed a courtroom full of adults that integrity doesn't have an age requirement. Every day I thank God for his courage, for that moment when he stood up and said enough. Because sometimes it takes the pure, untainted honesty of a child to cut through all the manipulation and reveal what's real. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it.